much for that invitation and opportunity to speak tonight. I'm going to talk about the issues of evolving brain research in Tulsa. It's an area that I'm excited about. I was with the University of Oklahoma, but retired a couple years ago, and now just get to work on things that are fun. So that's a good thing overall. We're going to talk a little bit about the different types of brain imaging that are available, some of the new techniques that are just coming online that are going to be available for us to better understand some of the major clinical neuropsychiatric disorders. We're going to talk a little bit about how some people in Tulsa are coming together to help this process go forward. And we're going to talk just a little bit about the Laureate Brain Institute. Now, there are different types of ways of looking at the brain. I'm going to talk about just two primarily. Structural is just primarily looking at pictures. What we're doing right now is looking at the evolving way to look at how the brain functions. You can take a picture, but it really doesn't tell you what's going on inside the brain. This is a standard MRI machine that has been around for about 20 years. And the MRI has historically been a structural imaging type of approach. But you can also use the MRI to actually take pictures of brain as it functions and as it does tasks. A particular thing that we see in the classical historical structural brain image is, you want to find a brain tumor, somebody has pain, and they have a headache, you want to find where that tumor is, how big it is. You can take a structural picture of a brain, and that'll give you insight into it. With functional brain imaging, we're looking at giving the brain a task. And when the brain has a task, it then has to activate and to do a process that involves a function. Here's a functional brain image in which a person's been given a visual stimulus, and the visual stimulus then shows up as a color on the functional brain image. Facial recognition is an important part of our brain function. That's one area that's important to look at. If you look on the left, what's the difference between looking at an avatar of a face versus a real face? Well, the brain is very complex, and in fact, there is a big difference, and it's noted in that previous slide there. We're interested particularly in extending looking at how the brain functions, not just how the normal brain functions, but how people with specific psychiatric syndromes or clinical neuroscience disorders like dementia. This is a quick overview of looking at a series of normal children and autistic children. We know that children with autism have problems with facial recognition. They don't do social cues very well. What does the functional brain image give us a clue about this? On the top group there, you'll see normal children being exposed to a face. On the middle slide there, you have, at the lower level, you have autistic children given the same stimulus, looking at faces. And what you can do with some of the fancy mathematical modeling, what you do is you take the normal response in a function and subtract the autistic response. And in the bottom, you see those where the deficits are for the children with autism. So there are specific areas that aren't processing facial images in a way that children without autism. And this gives us a little bit of a clue in thinking about what are the brain circuits that are involved, how might we think about prevention, how might we think about treatment. We also know that functional brain imaging helps us think about drugs and medication. This is a slide that shows on the left side a face that's been exposed to a fearful probe, and then if we give a person oxytocin, that can be basically wiped out. So how the brain functions is not just how it looks structurally, but also how it responds to the internal chemical environment. Functional brain imaging can also be used to help localize function. For example, if you have a brain tumor near where a person has function to use their hand, you can probe the hand, and that hand probe will allow you to be able to determine where the safe limits for surgery might be. The primary issue in functional imaging is looking at how oxygen is utilized and how oxygen is placed in different parts of the brain. So compared to just a static picture, you're looking at how the oxygen moves to the area that's being activated. For this process to go on, just in the last couple of weeks, we had our first functional brain image that was taken here in Tulsa, and it's been out at the Laureate Institute for Brain Research. We also have collaborators from the University of Oklahoma. And it's a pretty human-intensive process. We have 20 employees at the present time involved in this process. It could go up to 100. You have to have a physicist, PhD physicist, to make sure the machine's operating appropriately. We also rely on our friends at TU for computer science support, which has been very helpful in the development of this brain imaging program. The initial funding for this process, the brain imaging machine itself cost $3 million to start, but we have a variety of sources of funding for this process, including the Warren Medical Research Institute. If you're interested more in clinical neuroscience, I invite you to subscribe to my blog or an RSS feed. Brain posts, you can do that easily, and I'll usually update about twice a week on issues that I think are relevant mostly to a general audience related to brain function. If you want to contact me, this is my new business card. And I actually don't have a card yet, but this is my business card. I'm a mental so I'm going away from it. So people say, well, that looks good. I Google you, but I don't know what your name is. Well, you know who this guy is? Hey, Bill Gates. Substitute the Y for the G, and that's me. A little bit less money, overall net worth, but that's a cue for you. I'll be happy to interact with any of you if you have questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah.